One, two, 1, 2. Hello.
Hey Matt, how you doing?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Thanks so much for taking the time.
Sure. Yeah, it's nice to meet you virtually.
Yes. Yeah. Nice to meet you virtually. Meet so many people virtually now.
Hey, I'm just gonna get a glass of water. I'll be right back.
Oh, go for it. Great. Nice. How are things? You're Canada, right?
Oh, it's
How are
good.
things there?
Yeah, Quebec.
Quebec?
It's good, cold, very, very snowy. We have a very snowy winter, which has been great. Yeah, it's beautiful, and I love going out in the snow. So,
Yeah.
Cool.
What's the situation like there? Yeah, you're not in lockdown?
Oh yeah, we are. There's a curfew and
You are, okay.
Pretty strict regulations. So
Okay.
I think we're all in the same boat, aren't we?
Yeah. Probably, yeah. Hopefully not for too much longer though. I don't know how it's going with you guys, but we're seeing a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. It's a long tunnel.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, just a small amount of light, and that's keeping me going at the moment. So you are a violinist and also a professor. Is that a professor at which university again? In Quebec?
It's in Ontario. It's at the University of Toronto, Scarborough.
University of Toronto. Oh yeah, I see that. Okay. So tell me a little bit about yourself, and just tell me a little bit about yourself.
What would you like to know?
You're just how you found yourself playing the violin. How about we start with that?
All right, sure. I grew up in California, in San Francisco, and I started playing violin when I think I was about 7 or 8. My parents signed me up for violin lessons with the local teacher. And so that was classical violin with the Suzuki method. And then when I was 12 years old, 12, 13, then I got interested in fiddle music through a good friend who was who had also just started fiddling. We were both playing violin, and she began fiddling and brought me along to this wonderful fiddle camp called Valley of the Moon Scottish Fiddling School. So I got into Scottish fiddling when I was a teenager. Yeah, and that's that's primarily what I do musically. I did keep taking classical lessons for a while, but really I'm a fiddler.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is there much of a like a Scottish music scene in Canada? It's just interesting to know because I'm from Scotland.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are you from in Scotland?
Actually, grew up in Edinburgh.
Oh.
Yeah. It's quite nice hearing. It's quite nice knowing that people in other parts of the world, devote their life to the music that of my sort of my. I'm not fully Scottish. I'm a bit of I'm half and half English and Scottish. So I'm one of these. Yeah, but
right.
It's really nice to hear. So is there much of a scene in Canada for that music?
Well, Canada is a large country. There's quite a lot of fiddling in Canada of many different styles. I'd say that for sure the hotbed of Scottish fiddle music in Canada would be Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, which is its own music, its own musical style that comes out of Scottish immigration to Cape Breton. But yeah, when I was growing up, it wasn't here. Obviously, it was in California.
Sure, yeah.
And there's a pretty good scene of Scottish fiddling in California, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, it's great. It's very, very strong, and a lot of that is due to Alistair Fraser, this great Scottish fiddler who moved there in the 80s and launched this music camp that I mentioned, and a fiddle club, and just second music camp. So there's this very vibrant scene of people who love to play Scottish fiddle tunes.
That does make me excited. It really does. Just because, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really think about. I'm always looking for music completely out with my background and seeing that and getting excited by that. That's what I spend most of my time doing. And it's just really funny. It's really interesting knowing that there's little pockets around the world that are into that are into Scottish music. But so what I would be interested to know is how you found out about Ginger Smock.
Yeah, well, I was doing my graduate studies at McGill University in musicology, and I think the system here is a bit different than it is in the UK in terms of how graduate school works. But here you take courses for several years, those seminars, graduate seminars, and before you start working on your dissertation. So I was taking this wonderful graduate seminar called Gender and Jazz with Professor Lisa Barg. And as you do in a graduate seminar, every week we had a certain number of articles that we were reading, or books or chapters. But then we also had listenings. So she would make the weekly reading and listening list. So we'd read whatever the texts were, and then we'd listen to a few tracks.
Yeah.
Different performers, and that often related in some way to what we were reading or discussing in class that week. So at some point, a few weeks into the semester, we were one of the listenings. I'm pretty sure it was A Woman's Places in the Groove.
Yeah.
We were listening to that, and it's on the list is the Vivian Gary Quartet, and so I was expecting to hear horns, rhythm section, as most of the listenings had been, and then there's this violin. So I was really struck by that. I wanted to know who that violinist was. I'm not a jazz violin player, but I do play violin, and so I'm sort of interested in all things violin related. And I've definitely enjoyed listening to jazz violin, and every now and then tried my hand at it.
Yeah.
And so I thought, as you know quite well, jazz violin is a fairly small world, and definitely from that time period, mid 20th century, there's not that many jazz violinists. It's definitely not like today. So it was a real surprise to hear jazz violinist, a woman who I'd never heard of
Yeah.
ever. And that kind of set me down this track that I'm still on.
Okay. Yeah, because for me, your article was, I don't want to say the first time that I heard of Ginger Smock, because I have a feeling that I've heard the name once or twice, and I have a feeling that that will be through our mutual acquaintance,
Anthony.
Anthony. Yeah.
Yes.
In fact, he might have even mentioned her on this podcast in passing. I feel like it has happened, but I do think that it was the first time that I really found out about Ginger Smock through your article, and it was quite shocking, because there's the article. Go straight to find the track. I found that the track, the Vivian Gary Quartet, is it Vivian Gary?
Uh-huh.
And it's just amazing sound.
Yeah. And I hope you found, there's one track I talk about in that article called Strange Blues.
Yeah.
And actually the strings, they when they put the article up online, then they linked to a few sources that were available online. And afterwards I realized, Strange Blues, which is my favorite track and the one I talk about in the article, is not available. So I called up Anthony and I said, can we put Strange Blues up on YouTube?
Yeah.
I know he's not
He doesn't
a big
like it.
fan of things going up on YouTube, but he was very happy to do that. And
That's cool.
so I put up Strange Blues, and I've been, as people have been telling me, I read the article, it's so exciting to hear about Ginger Smock, then I've been sending them the link for that track, because I think if you want to hear Ginger Smock at the height of her soloing, I just adore that track. But yeah, she was an amazing player.
Yeah, I think what's nice, what was refreshing for me to hear is it was like a real nice mix of Stuff Smith's sort of. I mean, I don't want to just talk about other people's playing, but there was that swing that Stuff Smith had over, that I felt Stuff Smith always had over people like Grappelli, but still with that classical technique, and still with that, like, there's some really nice tone in there. You can tell that. You can tell. I think anytime you listen to a violin on an old recording like that, especially with a band, there's some battling going on, right, between the violinist and the rest of the band, and the tone can lose out, but you can still tell that there's like a really amazing tone there. So yeah, I was blown away. Would you mind going into a little bit of Ginger Smock's life?
Sure. And well, anything in particular?
Well, I'd be interested to know just a little bit, or I think listeners would probably be interested to know just a little bit about how, about sort of her musical origins, and how she learnt violin. And do you know? Can you pull that out of your
Sure.
head?
Yeah, sure. I can tell you what I've got, and of course I tried to write what I knew of in the strings article. And I should say I'm working on a longer article that would be for an academic publication. So I can let you know when that comes out. Things move slowly in the academic world, so
that's very exciting.
Don't hold your breath. But Ginger Smock was born in 1920. She was born in Chicago, but at a young age, at about the age of 6, she moved to Los Angeles and she grew up there. And she was raised by her aunt and uncle. And so she was growing up in Los Angeles in this community around Central Avenue, which was an incredibly vibrant African-American community that was really like the musical center of, well, it depends who you ask. I think you could think of it as the musical center of jazz in Los Angeles, or of the West Coast, or Betty Cox, who was a local historian, wrote that, one of the things that always stood out to me was the Dunbar Hotel, which was right there in Central Avenue, was I think one of the few, or maybe the only places west of the Mississippi where African Americans could go and spend the night and hear music. And so the whole history is, it's a history that's also tied up with it, histories of discrimination and segregation in the United States, which often I think we associate with just maybe the South, the American South, but there was also segregation and discrimination in Los Angeles at the time that she was growing up. And one of the things that made Central Avenue so close-knit and vibrant was that it was very difficult for African Americans to live in the neighborhoods surrounding that, because well, I'm not going to get into the whole history of like housing discrimination in the United States, but feel free to look it up. But there were restrictive housing covenants in other neighborhoods, and there was discriminatory policies. So the result of that is this very close African American community that's all based around this one part of the city. And it was incredibly vibrant. I mean, the performers who were coming through, and the clubs, and there were some local record labels, and there was also an incredible amount of music education, and that's really key to her growing up. There were local music schools, maybe what we would think of as community music schools, where families could sign their kids up for lessons, and there'd be recitals, and then there was also music in the local schools. And Ginger Smock really came up through that. She studied violin, classical violin, with a teacher named Bessie Downs. I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced. And she went to Jefferson High School, where she played in the band. She was the drum majorette, actually. Under the celebrated leader, Sam Brown, who, many great jazz musicians came out of that program. So she had a really strong musical upbringing, and she was also seems to have been something of a child prodigy. I mean, she was playing some pretty high profile public performances when she was quite young, and she was in the junior symphony or the all city orchestra, and she went to conservatory. It's this track toward a pretty high level classical career, to some extent, and that's where she thought she was headed, towards an orchestral career. But the other side of that is, she was born in 1920, and at the time that she would have been in conservatory and graduating till around 1940, early 40s, professional orchestras in the United States didn't hire African Americans. So there was no job. So she continued performing locally, playing. She worked at a lithography shop, and then she got a call, I think it was in 1943, around then, to sub for Stuff Smith at a local club. So he was not able to make the gig. And
did she already have a relationship with Stuff Smith at this point?
It's not clear to me. She mentions in some interviews meeting him, and I don't actually know if she'd met him before this or after. It was sometime around then. This is something Anthony and I chatted about, is when was that first meeting? She definitely knew who he was. And in addition to playing classical violin and being in the band at school and so on, she was also, she says she loved jazz. She listened to a lot of jazz. She would sit at home and try to improvise along with the records of jazz violinists, and she listened to the radio. So she had it in her musical mind, but she didn't think of herself as a jazz violinist at that time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
My sense is that she thought of herself as a musician, a working musician, and you know how that goes. You're a working musician, someone calls you for a gig, you take the gig.
Yeah.
And so she took this gig, and it seems like it was a success. Like I've done some work, like going back and looking at the historical newspapers. So there's some she's not mentioned hardly at all in the main Los Angeles papers, but there were local African American newspapers. So there's this whole network of historical, or I should say, a whole network of Black newspapers in the United States. Now I would call them historical Black newspapers because they're from the 1940s, the ones that I'm looking at, 50s and so on. But she's mentioned quite a bit in those papers. And so, it sounds like the gig went well. And then she started a trio called the Sepia Tones with two other women. They seem to have had quite a lot of early success. But then, there's another element that comes into play here also, which is that at the time, there were certain expectations about what kind of music women played. And in general, that was an expectation that they would play sort of a lighter repertoire and more novelty repertoire. If you're interested in this, you could check out some of the writing by Sherry Tucker. She's a wonderful historian. She's written a lot about women jazz musicians, especially during the war years. And she has a great book called Swing Shift about all-girl bands.
All right.
In that time period. Fantastic book.
Did you say Sherry Tucker?
Sherry Tucker.
Okay.
Yeah. And she's got several other publications as well. And she also wrote a really great article about West Coast jazz, but about not what is often called West Coast jazz, but about this other world of West Coast jazz. And that's, I think you can get it online. It was in the Pacific Review of Ethnomusicology. I think I'm getting that right. Anyways, she's a great resource. And she interviewed Ginger Smock shortly before she passed away.
Is that the video?
No, that's not Sherry Tucker. That's Betty Cox. So Betty Cox. So there are two interviews. Is that right? Well, there's some other sources where we have quotes from Ginger Smock, but those, in a way, I think of those as sort of the two primary interviews. So Betty Cox interviewed Ginger Smock, and there's that wonderful video now that's been put out by the UCLA archives.
Yeah, because
they have Betty Cox's archives. And then there's Sherry Tucker, who interviewed Ginger Smock. And if you want to read excerpts of that, that's in this article I just mentioned from the Pacific Review of Ethnomusicology. So that's like a lot of documentation there, but
that's cool. It's really interesting to hear, what goes into this sort of research. Really is. I don't know. For me, especially me, I'm a musician. I'm not never been a researcher. In fact, I'd be really interested. Is this the first time that you've ever researched a specific person in this way?
To this extent.
To this extent, I mean, I'm sure that
one person. Yeah. And I think part of that, there's, part of that for me was that I was so fascinated by her story and by the fact that, the further into it you get, her list of accomplishments is quite impressive.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the disconnect between that and the fact that nobody's ever heard of her, or that she,
Yeah.
is really not present in our conversations nowadays about jazz violin. Like that fascinates me.
Yeah.
That kind of historical forgetting, and why that happens, and the ways that forgetting is tied up with our understandings of, I guess I'd say, of who belongs in history, and how the questions of who belongs are tied up with gender and race and age also,
Do you mind going into that? Like what you're saying?
Sure. Well, I mean, so if I pick up a little bit, about where I left off there, because okay, so actually one of the things I should say is, so I gave you a bit of her childhood and early story there, and if we're going to talk about gender and how women are often represented, this is something that Sherry Tucker speaks about quite eloquently, that stories about women and about their professional careers tend to represent them as amateur, and tend to focus, for instance, on their childhood and on their influences, and don't actually talk about their professional successes. And whereas with men, the stories tend to be that we talk about their careers and how they build their careers. And that's actually something that you can see in the early 1950s. There's a profile of Smock and Downbeat. And by the time we get to that, I think it's 1951, so that by that point, she had this first gig in let's say 1943. I don't know exact date, because I've just seen different references for when that gig is, but it seems to be 1943. She had that, then she had the Sepia Tones. Then she started getting called into the recording studio. She plays on this Girls in Jazz album. She plays on 4 sides for this Girls in Jazz album, which is produced by Leonard Feather. She's not after the Sepia Tones, then she has this whole slew of bands, and she's playing local clubs. I mean, she's in the newspaper all the time. They're playing, what does she have? She has Ginger and Her Magic Notes. She has the 4 V's. She also gets a bunch of gigs. Again, this ties to kind of the expectations of who plays what music, but she gets gigs playing like gypsy music, which she seems to love, and she gets not gypsy jazz, but sort of more like,
I don't think the term gypsy jazz existed.
Yeah, no, this is more like kind of light classical repertoire that's got some imagined vision of what imagined European gypsies might be like.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with like Roma music or people at all, but it's sort of like this, sort of popular imagining of that. She gets this long-running gig at this place called the Waikiki, where she and the band dress, as she says, Hawaiian, and they play what they call island music. So this is all like she's like very successful. She's like a professional working musician. She's got plenty of gigs. She's got lots of recognition. They have, every name you can imagine. She's called the Sweetheart of the Strings. She's called she's well, that's later. She's billed as the Bronze Gypsy. That's later, not in the late 40s. But and then she's getting called to the recording studio. She's working as a sideman on different for different lineups, and you can just check out Anthony's great discographies of her for that. She's also starts to make demos, and all of these early recordings you can hear on this 2005 CD that Anthony Barnett put out called Strange Blues. Um, so she's making these demo recordings, she's playing local clubs, she's just working like crazy. She's also seems to be involved in a lot of community organizations, playing for the church and playing for benefits. And then I'm getting to this 1951 moment. So then she gets called to be band leader on a television show.
Mm-hmm.
And for this band, an all women band called the Chicks and the Fiddle, on a national CBS show. They rehearse, they get some press, but there's no corporate sponsor, and so the show closes after about eight weeks. But then after that, she gets called to be a guest on the local variety show called Dixie Showboat. And she's such a hit there, I guess, that first in the ads, first she's billed as a special guest, and then eventually she becomes kind of a regular member of the crew. So all of this is going, like, here she is 30 years old. And then there's this interview in Downbeat, the profile in Downbeat in 1951 that only talks about her childhood and her influences. Wow. And there's only one item of her professional career that's mentioned, which is that Girls in Jazz album that Leonard Feathered produced.
That's crazy.
It's kind of crazy. So anyways, so talking about historical forgetting, I feel like that's to me, that's all part of the story.
Yeah. So it would be interesting, to know, as if this is you've gone super deep into the life of and the musical life of Ginger Smock. Like, what was one of the main take-home things what is one of the take-home things that stuck with you about her story?
Made me think a lot about, I guess we're going to just talk about gender a lot. It made me think a lot about how different professional trajectories are for women and for men as they age. Because her career develops, the 40s, then the 50s, she's got this television work, radio work. She's touring nationally with the Steve Gibson and the Red Caps. They're like an R&B band, and she's getting all these gigs in Las Vegas. She becomes, in the 60s, she becomes music director for this sort of daily cruise ship to the Catalina Islands. So it's just like, you look at it, I mean, I've spent enough years as a working musician, to look at that and say, like, wow, she was gigging.
Yeah.
She was doing well. She was gigging. She was known in the community. She had some good touring. She decided she didn't want to do a whole lot more touring. She came back. She got some local gigs. Like, she had a strong career.
Totally.
What didn't happen for her, which happened for other jazz violinists, was this kind of late career recognition, sort of the discovery moment, which, if it had happened for her, would have been probably in the 70s. So she would have been in her 50s then, right? And this is when she's had a long career. Now she's doing more local work. She's playing in a lot of orchestras backing big name singers. Then she moved to Las Vegas, where that's pretty much what she does, right? Starting in the 70s, playing in these big showroom orchestras. But this is if she were Stuff Smith, maybe this is the moment where there would be kind of that late career recognition of an album, of some festival gigs, of someone saying, oh my gosh, like, look at this treasure. Or Papa John Creech, they sort of like these moments later in
Grappelli as well, right? Grappelli had a sort of, I know he was celebrated in his early life, but he had a long period of just being a gigging musician around, and he had a resurge and became more famous when he was older, I think. Right. Is that not right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Grappelli's history that closely, but I'm going to take your word on that one.
Well, never take my word, but but from what I've from the stuff that I've checked out, there was definitely a moment, like there was a time when he was just playing in Paris
mm,
hotels, and I think that's when, yeah. Well, anyway, he's just playing in Paris hotels, and it was like maybe in the 70s, someone was like, "Hey, come up," and he came
mm,
around to the UK and became really, really famous in the UK. Maybe I'm just being UK centric, but I think it did happen anyway.
yeah.
Carry on.
Well,
I
yeah,
stopped
yeah.
talking.
So Ginger Smock, she wanted that. It's pretty clear that she wanted that, and
Yeah.
she thought she deserved it.
Hmm.
And when you listen to her early recordings and you look at her career trajectory, then then you say, yeah, what happened? Um,
Hmm.
but um, and we know she wanted that because 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 I read these letters she wrote to John Reeves, who was a Canadian jazz violin collector,
Hmm.
um, who was in touch with her, got in touch with her in the 70s. Um, and 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 he did his best at that time to help her make that happen. I mean, she was also doing what she could. She was, recording some demos, and and then he was sending out letters. Basically, what she wanted was an album and some festival gigs, and as you say, like that kind of late career success recognition. And there are these years where she and John Reeves are writing back and forth, and he's saying, well, I tried, I sent out these letters, and they might be interested,
Hmm.
and then they're never interested, or they're interested, but sorry, we already have jazz violinists on our roster. It's not the time. But that's the line that she got her whole. That's the line she got her whole life, to some extent. Like, we already have, fill in the name of a male jazz violinist.
Yeah.
Um, so um, so yeah. So what's the there are I think there are many takeaways from her story, but definitely one of them is that we live in a musical world where being a 50 or 60-year-old woman is
Hmm.
not the same as being a 50 or 60-year-old man, with this, in terms of what happens to your career trajectory.
Yeah, and but why do you think that is? I know that you're not going to have all the answers, but why do you think that is?
Well, why do I think that is? Because people like to go to shows and see young women's bodies on stage.
Hmm. So, as in, like,
Maybe that's changing, maybe that'll change. But
hopefully, but I guess what you're saying is back then, the women in music or women in jazz were used as like a, oh, look at this, and it was about sex, or it was, or sex was brought into it. People were, people would be sexed up, they, or they would. Is that the
well,
idea?
I think it's it's complicated, partly because I think it's really important to recognize that it's not that it's not about positioning women musicians as somehow victims or help, so kind of helpless in a larger system. That and that actually positioning women like that is part of the problem.
Hmm.
Um, at the same time that this article about Ginger Smock of only talking about her childhood, around the same time, if you look at other articles about women musicians, women jazz players coming out in downbeat, for instance, Leonard Feather wrote a whole series. The way that the women are kind of always portrayed as like helpless in the face of sexism.
Mm.
Um, and when you look at Ginger Smock's story, it's like it's she had a lot of agency. She had a lot of control. She was a band leader. She was an arranger. She was a composer. She called the shots in a lot of her work. And I think she was quite good at that.
Yeah.
Clearly. I mean, otherwise you don't keep getting hired
Yeah.
as band leader. So, but the place where that she didn't have that control at that time was around recording, because she could make the demos, but that required like an A&R person then saying, no, yeah, we want to sign you to this label. You know, if there's that. So that was a sort of an place of access that was not as open to her. I mean, she did make recordings for sure,
Yeah.
but she also tells stories about at kind of in some ways at the height of her early career in the early 50s, playing a gig, having an A&R rep come up to her and say, I love what you're doing. Send me, make a demo. She makes the demo. He brings it back to RCA Victor and they say, that's amazing. Who's playing the violin? This story is an article. And
I saw that.
and then and he says, so this is interesting because when she tells the story to John Reeves, as she writes it to him, she says that the A&R rep says, it's a girl in San Francisco. And they say, oh, forget it. We have Joe Venuti. But when she tells the same story to Sherry Tucker in an interview, then the A&R rep says, it's a colored girl in San Francisco. And then they say, we have Joe Venuti.
Right.
So this is how, I think those stories both come from later in life. That's her looking back on her career. I mean, that telling of the story. But I think this is how she understood that these kind of sort of turning points when you're successful, but you can kind of break into the next level, which I think for her would have been through a recording.
Yeah.
Or through some more high profile gigs. And those moments, she saw those moments over and over not being accessible to her. And there's no question that, when women were on stage at that time, it was partly about their bodies. As women on stage today, often it's still about their bodies, So, but I guess I also want to recognize that women musicians in the mid-century were very aware of that. It's part of the job.
Sure.
Part of what they did,
Yeah.
And Smock herself says that in the interview with Sherry Tucker. She says, I had these publicity photos that made me look, what does she say, positively vampish. But that was just part of the job. That's it's that, like, she's very practical about it.
Yeah, but I guess that comes to when the imbalance is like, like you basically what you've said is men. If part of your part of what's being sold about you is your youth and to some degree sex or whatever, however you want to call it, there's just a massive imbalance there because everyone gets old, and that's just part of life, and it's just very I guess that's part of where the imbalance comes from. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of the way gender and race and age intersect, the way gender and race shape, sort of what opportunities are available, changes with age.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's too simplistic. I don't know if I'd say it exactly like that. I think I might just say that in a musical career, especially at the time that Ginger Smock was working, which was the 1940s through the 70s, 80s, the body that you're in shapes to some extent the opportunities that you have. It's not just how you play.
Yeah.
And the way, and an older woman's body is as a society, we put different meaning on that than an older man's body. I think that maybe just,
Yeah,
but but I think it's really important not to position Ginger Smock as a victim.
of course.
You
Yeah,
know, I think it's more a question of she was very successful at working at recognizing how to make a living with what she was doing,
yeah,
playing jazz violin in these times.
yeah,
And part of what she was so good at was what I would call stage presence or
yeah,
performance. Like she was just this, seems to be a stunning performer. Like she
yeah,
would get up and she would hold the stage.
yeah.
Um, and so that, that's also part of it. It's like she knew that the body she was in was part of what she was
Sure.
performing.
Yeah,
And she knew how to do that
of course. Yeah,
in a
it's
really
good.
like powerful way.
Mm. Yeah. You know what? Just going back to actually Ginger's music, it was interesting. You said that she played drums to begin with. Is that
Yeah.
right? She did a bit of drumming.
Yeah,
'Cause
well, she was the drum majorette. I've never heard any recordings or anything of her playing drums, but she was the drum majorette in the high school band.
Yeah, because she does play with a lot of rhythm. She is.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is I think that violin is often, or when people come from a classical background, often they don't get that swing as much as as a sax player. And a lot of that's due to sax players will be playing in big bands and they get used to that swing and blah blah blah. But Ginger Smock, there doesn't seem to be any issue with that. There's like full on rhythm. There's full on why have I forgotten the word? She knows how to play with offbeats, basically. Syncopation. There you go. Imagine forgetting that word. That's pretty embarrassing, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I know her rhythmic sense is it's amazing, and that's something that, well, Anthony Barnett, he I don't know if you've heard, he has this great story that he tells about talking to Stuff Smith and saying, "Is there anyone else who plays like you?"
Oh yeah,
He says, "Yeah, Ginger Smock."
yeah,
Um, so
yeah,
with that, like, I mean, you could call it like a horn-like
yeah.
approach, but I think rhythm it's part of that. It's like maybe it's sort of the way horns approach rhythm.
It totally is. I'd say when I hear that, it's like the backing lines,
Yeah.
and you can imagine either Stuff Smith going, hey, or a big band going, doing the same thing. In my head, when I hear Stuff Smith and Ginger Smock playing those little lines in the background, it's basically a sax section to me. It's exactly the same thing. But yeah, it's interesting that it comes that she did have a sort of a little bit of a background in drums, and I think that a couple of violinists I've spoken to on here, and are exactly the same. Actually, they find that having some drumming does help that. What's this new the new thing that you're doing about Ginger?
Which new thing?
You said that you're writing.
Oh, well, so the focus of this project for so long has been, well, first it was just trying to understand some of her career trajectory and looking through the historical African American newspapers. And then through some kind of wonderful, fortuitous circumstances, I ended up getting in touch with these two families. So one was, well, I won't get into all the connections right now, but it's essentially sort of a member of her extended family.
Okay.
And the other was the family of John Reeves. So in touch with his son Dean. And so so both families had archives, what I would think of as archives that relate to Ginger Smock. So then I worked with them to digitize those and deposit the collections at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. And so I've been, yeah, I guess I've been working on that and did some kind of public presentations about Ginger Smock, but I hadn't really written anything. And so
Okay.
I was really glad to write the Strings article, but because I'm in academia, I sort of also feel like this, this is something I want to also write an academic article about.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm imagining, a couple of pieces. I think an article, a lot, just, academic articles are longer than magazine articles. So you can think of it the Strings article, but like more in depth and maybe I want to try to, spend some more time thinking through these questions around age and kind of the constraints that around gender and race and age and how she was negotiating those and her sense of I think sort of her sense of musical identity and so I'm writing about that and then I think I'll also like to write something about her Las Vegas years because we have all these amazing letters. So it's a project that's been going on for a while, and I guess I've been really focused on the archiving side of it.
Yes.
And it's exciting to be at a stage now where I'm just trying to write a bit more and get some more information out.
Get it out, basically. Yeah. You've
Get
obviously
it
got
out.
loads of information, and you need to, you're finding new ways to get it out. That's cool.
There's a lot of information and it feels like I mean, I'm really in it, so it's hard to like sort of step out from the outside and look at it, but I feel like it's an important story to tell.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you talk about the forgetting of this musical forgetting, or people us forgetting, different people, this is a good way to sort of remedy that, because obviously she was forgotten. I know that you don't want to talk about her too much as a victim, but she's been missed out of the timeline in jazz violin, for me anyway, and she has, and it's a shame. And what's a shame is knowing that there's all these recordings out there that we can't listen to actually as well. It'd be really, what do you think? What do you think is the way forward? Do you think that there would ever be a chance of some more releases? Do you know?
Well, the recordings are complicated. I mean, they are all at the Smithsonian now, so that's a public institution. It's those recordings are it's so I guess I should say that the recordings that Anthony Barnett put out on the Strange Blues CD are her studio and demo recordings, right, from the first decade of her career, and those were commercial. They were like made in professional recording studios, and even if they were unreleased, for the most part, I think there's some air checks and so on, but the later recordings are quite different, because I mean they're all from John Reeves, almost all, and there's a wide range. I mean, some of it is Ginger Smock making dubs of her own earlier commercial recordings on a tape and sending that to John Reeves and commenting. And I think the commentary is really interesting too. The sound quality is not so great because it's like a copy of a copy. But she's saying, "Oh yeah, here's a track that I did, with so and so." And there's that, but there's also things like John Reeves and Ginger Smock sitting around at his house listening to Jean-Luc Ponty and talking about it.
That's amazing.
And
oh my God, that's so cool. I'd love to hear it.
other jazz violinists, like just listening to jazz violinists and talking. And then there's some shows that she did that he recorded, but where unfortunately the audio quality of the recording, or maybe the tape is degraded or something, but it's just, the sound quality is just really, really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So it's not as easy as saying like, okay, all of this stuff should just go away.
Sure.
Like Anthony did this amazing curation process with those early recordings.
It's amazing that. Yeah, I need to get hold of that. The problem is, and this is an issue. I don't want to rubbish this, but like I don't have a CD player. That's the thing, and nobody has a CD player. And I really would like to see these in some way be on the internet. I really do. I mean, I know Anthony.
Talk to Anthony about that one.
I will do. Or maybe actually no, I won't. I'm not gonna try and tell him to put his music up online if he doesn't want to. But there's all this stuff, and it's like I'd love it. I'd love it if it was online. Because then that might help towards a bit of a remembering. I mean, we could. There's some stuff online, right? There's a couple of recordings that you can find.
Yeah, there's a couple of recordings
of Ginger. But it's quite hard to find it. I mean, it's not hard to find that, but that's it, right? Maybe 2, 3 recordings.
Yeah, I think there's a few more, but I mean, you could buy a CD player.
I could buy a CD player. I'm not just saying for me. I could buy a CD player.
I know what you're saying.
One could buy a CD player. Everyone could buy a CD, but like I don't know, is that going to happen?
I think this is maybe a longer conversation about equitable.
Yes.
About
because then you put it on Spotify and it's like, cool, now no money is made whatsoever.
Right. Yeah. So I think if there's this is a much larger question about digital distribution and equitable payment for digital distribution. So I'm not going to get into that conversation.
Okay, that's fine. I probably shouldn't.
And I should go in a couple of minutes, but
okay.
But anyway, so for the other recordings, they're I think there's sort of a longer process of going through those, and I think it's also important to recognize that in the years when those recordings were made, which is the last decades of her life, she wasn't playing jazz.
Right.
She was concertmaster for Sammy Davis Jr. in Las Vegas, so she was playing, but her jazz chops were she wasn't keeping up her jazz chops in the same way, and that's something that she also says in her letters. So there's some nice moments, but it's not I mean, I think part listening to those older recordings, part of what it makes me think about is what would have happened if, after she recorded Strange Blues back in the 50s, a record label had really taken her seriously and said, this is, run with this. Like, we love this. But that's not what happened.
And that is a shame. And I do think that people's music gets better because of through positive reinforcement as well,
I mean, as a musician, this. As a musician, you get better at the kind of music you get to play.
Yeah.
So if it in her later career, she's primarily doing orchestral work, and when she was doing the cruise ship, that was also island music. That's what we wanted. So I don't, and it's a value judgment that we could choose to make or not about, what kind of music what kind of musical sounds from her career do we value more? But that maybe we just need to weigh that with what was she given the opportunity to record. Anyways, I think hopefully it just opens more questions. for
Yeah.
all of us to think about the history of it.
Well, thanks so much for doing this.
Well,
Thanks so
thank you,
much for
Matt. It's
chatting
a
to me.
pleasure. Yeah.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear. It's interesting to hear what goes into, an article such as the one that you were doing, and I guess the wider research that you're doing. But it is interesting to hear what goes on
Thanks.
behind those
Thanks.
things, and interesting to hear your thoughts on Ginger and her music and her career. And yeah, thanks so much for doing it. Is there anything that that you'd like to plug or anything like that?
I think if you're going to attach anything to this online, please put that The Strange Blues. It's up on YouTube.
Yeah.
And definitely for those who do still have CD players, please put the link to Strange Blues.
Yeah.
Because it's such a great album, and it'd be great for folks to go out and get that. Plus, it's got detailed liner notes and everything. So yeah, definitely, if you can put the link to that for ordering. And I've also put the link for ordering on the YouTube clip with Strange Blues.
Yeah. So yeah, you're talking about the AB Fable.
Yeah, exactly.
The AB
But I'm
Fable
gonna
archive, the website. So I'll put that. I'll put a link under the within this podcast.
But I'm going to tell you which YouTube I'm talking about, because this is the one that I put up with Anthony's.
Say that again.
Yeah, hold on.
Okay.
Can I put it in the Zoom chat?
Sure.
Oh no, I can't. Chat disabled.
Someone said that recently. My chat's disabled. I don't mean that.
Oh, that's okay.
I've got chat on. I'm saying something.
Not for me. Okay, that's okay. I'm going to send it to you.
Yeah, send it over.
Yeah, I'll send it on Facebook.
Yeah, for anybody. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah. No, well, I need to go, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, thanks so much for this. Nice to chat to you, and have a great rest of your day.
Your pleasure. Take care.
All right. See you.
Bye-bye.